Now that we've talked a little bit about the history of the fire department, let's look at Chapter 2 and talk about some of the fire and emergency service career opportunities. The objectives for this chapter: identify fire protection jobs in the public and private service. List duties and requirements for the position of firefighter trainee and firefighter. List duties and requirements for the position of a firefighter paramedic. Give examples of fire service jobs other than firefighter. List duties and requirements of search and rescue teams. And finally, list duties and requirements of a wildland firefighter. It is important to note in this chapter we will talk about a multitude of different jobs in the fire service other than just firefighter. But obtaining a job as a firefighter can be difficult at times. Reason being, you have a lot of times 100, 200, 300 individuals applying for maybe only a handful of jobs, 5, 10, or 12. It can call for advanced education and specialized training, depending on what type of job you are going for in terms of inspections or investigations. You would need additional credentials to do that job. And employment prospects can be favorable if you meet the rigorous requirements of the job, whether it be all the educational requirements or physical fitness. It all depends on exactly what job you're going to do. So we're going to go ahead and run through a few of these in the upcoming slides. It is important to note that we will come back to a few of these other jobs later on in the text and go a little bit more in depth with them. When we think about a firefighter job, a lot of times the first one that comes to mind is a fire cadet or / recruit position. And this is an entry-level position. The educational requirements in Georgia traditionally are high school diploma or GED, and then entrance into a fire academy. And these fire academies can be done in-house or at a state facility. For example, here in Georgia, you have GIPSTIC, which is the Georgia Public Safety Training Center, where they have I believe it is a 2-month-long, 40-hour-a-week process to get you to get your Firefighter 1 credentials. Other in-house recruit classes can run anywhere between, say, 3 months to 6 months, depending on what are the education requirements for the job. As seen here in this photo, you have a fire recruit class going through where they're learning all the particulars about becoming a firefighter in this particular fire academy. In the fire academies, they walk you through the entire process from physical fitness to how to put on the gear to how to actually fight fire and understand the fire dynamics and chemistry. In order to get the job as a recruit, a lot of the minimum requirements, again, are just a high school diploma and a GED and certain minimal reading and mathematics skill levels, but we'll go more into this later in the hiring process in an upcoming chapter. The next position we're going to talk about is the firefighter position. This is the rank individuals achieve after going through recruit school. They get their state certification and they get their NPQ, or National Professional Qualification certification here in Georgia that meets the National Fire Protection Agency 1001 Firefighter 1 or 2 standard. Now, this can also be considered an entry-level position, as some departments require you to have this certification prior to applying, and they do not run a recruit school, or they run an abridged recruit school where they do what is called like a fast track, where they just go over how they do certain firefighter tasks at their jurisdiction. During the firefighter period, oftentimes you have a probationary period, and that can be anywhere from 3 months to 6 months. And the reason they make it 6 months or even up to a year a lot of times, is the fact of shift work. Once you come out of training, whether it be recruit school or from technical colleges such as Athens Tech, you'll be put on shift, and that shift works 24 hours on, 48 hours off. So for the most part here in Georgia, that's your shift work schedule. Other departments sometimes do 12 hours, but pretty much everybody in Georgia does 1 day on, 2 days off. So 24 on, 48 off. So in order to get a good idea of what kind of employee you're going to be, your work ethic, they extend out the probationary period because you, again, only work every third day. As a firefighter, you're going to be supervised by your fire officer. Usually it's a lieutenant, maybe a captain, depending on the company. And sometimes it's kind of a staggered or tier approach where you'll have maybe a mentor, or say a driver or a relief driver, also known as an FAO, or maybe a firefighter too, that kind of takes you under their wing and they kind of help direct you on station life in your job and things of that nature and what is expected at the department. But this is the, traditional firefighter. You quote right backwards, you pull the fire hose, wash the fire truck, make coffee, dinner, etc. Another firefighter job is considered to be a federal firefighting job, often assigned to military bases and federal installations, and they work for the Department of Defense. A lot of the military bases, you have your actual military service personnel that do fire department services. However, you have certain places where they're not military personnel. They can be considered subcontractors or things of that nature, but they're actually federal employees that are hired to do the job as a firefighter. And this can be at many different facilities. For example, you could go to work for the Department of Energy as a firefighter at possibly, say, the Industrial Petroleum Reserves out in the Gulf Coast area. Brine Mound is one, another one in Louisiana and Mississippi, for example. Another type of federal firefighter would be one out in Carlsbad, New Mexico, where they are basically federal employees and not military personnel, but they're tasked with taking care of the firefighting duties out at Carlsbad, New Mexico, and that is where the waste isolation pilot plant is. Basically, they ship radioactive material to the salt flat caverns in Carlsbad, New Mexico, and they bury it, say 10, 20 stories underground. I don't remember exactly how it is in these caverns. So they're tasked with doing the firefighting jobs there. Now, this job, firefighter, EMT, or higher, such as a paramedic, is very common in the fire service these days. A lot of fire agencies also run the ambulance or the EMS side of things. So they're under one umbrella. They're also firefighters as well as EMT and paramedics. So whether they're working on an ambulance or a fire truck, they do provide some measure level of care, whether it be basic life support or advanced life support on emergency calls. It's important to note that more and more calls are EMS related in nature, and I would say it's a safe bet to say 80% or greater revolve around EMS medical calls or car accidents than actual fire calls, because with current trends in technology and sprinkler systems and building materials, our fire calls are decreasing greatly. However, on the flip side of the coin, as baby boomers and other generations get older and people are living longer, they're developing more health problems. And these health problems are things like diabetes, high blood pressure, stroke, heart attacks. So these people are obviously in need of quick emergency care. And a lot of times your fire departments handle that, or sometimes it can be a third service. Meaning you have a fire department, an EMS service, and say police or sheriff. Now, my hat is off to this group in firefighting, the wildland firefighters, folks that are out in California, for instance, this month, fighting wildfires. You see all the time these fires out of control, burning cities toward Los Angeles and things of that nature. It's a very physically demanding job. And traditionally, these assignments can last up to 14 days. They're literally 16-hour days and 8 hours of rest for 2 weeks. And you're working on a fire line, meaning that you're out there in the woods or the wilderness area, the wildland area, and all you got to put out the fire with is probably a chainsaw, some rakes and flaps and torches and things of that nature. So in your wildland setting, you don't have a whole lot of water out there to put the fires out. You may even set prescribed burns where you're going to burn the undergrowth or the thatch, the dry weeds and stuff in face of the oncoming fire as to hope to starve it out of fuel so it may go out. Wildland firefighters are a lot of times either federal or state employees or even private companies that have these folks. Some of the assignments may include HELTAC crews, meaning helicopter crews that pick water up in the big buckets and drop them on fire. You may have hotshot crews, again, that go in to fight the fire, or even say smoke jumpers, which are the real wild and crazy individuals that like to jump out of perfectly good airplanes with a parachute, land in the wilderness per se with just their pack and do measures to try to prevent the fire from spreading and keeping it contained. A lot of times these are such specialized individuals that they go around the United States or even possibly around the world. So they have what are known local resources or incident management type teams where they can be deployed from, say, Texas or California out to these wildland firefighter areas, wherever they may be. Another special type of firefighter are your ARFs, or Aircraft Rescue Firefighters. These are the individuals that work on airports and they're responsible for such things as plane crashes, fuel spills, and medical emergencies that are landed at the airport runway. They have highly specialized equipment that are ready to deal with jet fuel fires or from the plane crash, because that's a whole different ball of wax, flammable liquids, as opposed to, say, your normal house and room and contents. So that requires specialized training, and these training guidelines are set forth by the FAA, or Federal Aviation Association. Here is a great picture of an airport firefighter apparatus or fire engine, also known as a crash truck. Notice how it's a bit different than your traditional fire truck. And two things I want to point out are this, what is known as a master stream device, or a big nozzle that's used to help attack the fire. And this one right below it. And these are all controlled by the officer that sits right here. So they're literally fighting fire from inside their crash truck. And reason being, it provides additional protection from the immense heat that these fires put out. And we'll look at some turnout gear photos that are entirely different than your traditional structure fires. They're designed to repel more heat than your standard firefighting turnout gear. Often, after that firefighter, or shall we say recruit, graduates to firefighter 1, then firefighter 2, a lot of times they become a fire apparatus engineer or driver. And they're tasked with driving and operating a variety of different fire apparatus. And we'll go more into that later in another chapter on specialized equipment. It does require specialized training, and it requires the understanding of pumper hydraulics, and we have a whole class on that here at the college. But hydraulics is basic principle of figuring out how much pressure a fire truck needs to generate to get the water from the hydrant in the fire truck to the firefighters inside of a structure, and make sure that they have enough pressure, enough water to do their job. It must be able to insert figures for pump calculations very quickly. To be honest, there are all types of formula out there to figure out your gallons per minute. For example, 29.7 times to the diameter square times the square root of your nozzle pressure will tell you how many gallons per minute you're flowing from a smooth bore tip nozzle. And the reason they need to know how many gallons per minute they're flowing, because that directly affects the friction loss or the hydraulics that they need to figure out how much pressure to pump to ensure that the firefighters are getting the most appropriate water supply. Now, not only do they need to be able to do math very well, they need to be able to have good vision, and they need to be able to drive the fire truck. A lot of times, fire department accidents and fire engines are pretty devastating, because not only are you prevented from going to the emergency you're going to, but now someone has to come take care of you. So you have to learn to drive very safely and not, excuse the expression, like a bat out of heck. Use something called due regard. And there's a whole list of requirements to drive fire trucks. But again, this is just a brief overview. Another great specialty people like to get into in fire service are your SARS teams, or search and rescue teams. They can be within a department or an agency. They can be a regional team. It can be a state team or a national team. Or you can be part of an urban search and rescue team, or USAR, or any part of the 28 FEMA teams. And these USAR teams were used in the event like tornadoes or natural disasters such as hurricanes, or even the flooding from hurricanes coming across Texas and Mississippi, or even the ones in Louisiana from years past. And they would go to an urban type area and perform complicated search and rescue measures to help these people that may be trapped or stranded within their homes. Here's another specialty team that kind of falls under that search and rescue, but you have, for example, swift water rescue teams here that go out and try to help people that become stranded in rapids or rivers or things of that nature, whether it be from flash flooding or recreational people going out and get themselves in trouble, so to speak, over their heads. Another type of search and rescue team are individuals that work in confined spaces or collapsed structures that search in the debris. Again, can be very dangerous, and there's certain ways to get people out from under this debris to ensure their safety without having more injuries, saying to them. Mexico has a great collapse and confined space team after dealing with all the earthquakes that they've had in recent years. A lot of these specialized search and rescue teams are comprised into task force, and these task forces can be from areas such as Texas or Louisiana or Mississippi, a group of individuals. And again, they go in and perform these specialized search and rescue functions, such as in the case of Hurricane Katrina or Texas wildfires. Another career in firefighting is one that kind of transitioned from the government side to, say, the private sector, and those are your industrial firefighters, and they receive specialized training for manufacturing and refinery fires, such as your petroleum plants, your petrochemical, your pipelines, again, your strategic petroleum reserve places, things of that nature. And a lot of times these industrial firefighters can either be firefighters that stand alone at these facilities, and that's all they do, or they can be individuals that work at that facility doing other jobs, and then they have to learn industrial firefighting. There are great training facilities in Bradenton Fire, or TEX, and Texas A&M is the big one. A lot of industrial plants send their folks to Texas A&M for industrial firefighter training. They've got a really great facility out there. And again, they deal with more specialized chemical fires that they're going to possibly deal with on a regular basis as opposed to regular house fires. So again, this is another specialized training endeavor that's a little different from your regular everyday firefighter. I love this picture. Here is a great picture of a simulated chemical complex fire training structure. So those high tubes are considered distillers or crackers, and basically they cook the petroleum product down to whatever base chemical that they're getting at, and they're simulating obviously here that you have some sort of fire going on. So we talked about search and rescue folks. We talked about folks that like driving fire trucks and the regular firefighter. Well, here's another specialty that you can get into in the career of firefighting, and that's your hazardous material folks, or hazmat techs. They do train to a minimum standard, requires 120 hours of specialized training. Also in weapons of mass destruction and biological warfare agents. So these are the folks that don't really, I hate to use the term fight fire because they do, but their specialty is dealing with the chemicals, biological terrorist types event, or maybe just a natural gas leak of, say, chlorine or any other processing chemical. With the hazmat career, you have 3 levels. You have awareness, operations, and technician. And your awareness folks are folks that are trained to identify that there is a hazardous material incident. And then, of course, operations are designed to contain that incident to a predetermined area. And then the technicians are the individuals that go in to try to mitigate or minimize the damage. So, for example, they'll put on what's known as a level A suit. And those are those big, I hate to use the term, body bag looking suits with a window, or banana suits that they wear that are totally self-contained, and they're breathing their own air, and then they go into the hot zone and they try to turn off valves or plug leaks or do things of that nature. A lot of chemistry and chemical analysis is involved in this type of job. Here's some folks that are actually in what are known as level B suits, which aren't as encapsulated as level A, but again, they're designed to protect the wearer from certain liquids and respiratory type protection. Okay, on the fire side, the last one we're going to look at are your fire investigators / type inspector folks. A lot of times large towns may have their own arson units. In smaller towns, you may have folks that depend on one certified individual to cover, say, a couple of cities or a couple of communities, things of that nature. A lot of times your arson investigators must also be credentialed as a police officer, and reason being, when you're determining something as arson, arson is basically defined as destroying something by means of fire that does not belong to you. So you're actually setting a fire and destroying something. And of course that is illegal. So if you're doing something illegal, it would stand to reason that you need to be able to prove that whoever or whatever did what. So you need to be able to collect evidence. You need to be able to have an idea of what's going on in the scene, and a lot of times these people need to be mandated so they can have arrest powers or write citations for individuals that break the law. So let's look at some of our non-firefighting careers in fire protection. First being our dispatchers, our 911 operators. They send the appropriate units to the scene, monitor emergency radio traffic, and keep up with everybody and their requests to make sure that the request gets sent to the scene. So these folks have a very hectic job, but a 911 dispatcher, again, is a public safety type job. Here's a great picture of a dispatch communication center where the 911 calls come into the center. The people answer the 911 calls, and see the various screens here is where they dispatch and track the units going to the different emergencies, whether it be police, fire, EMS, utilities such as gas and water. These poor folks are tasked with tracking and keeping up with everybody and making sure they have what they need to do their job on scene. Occupational health and safety specialist. This job is found in both private and public sectors. This role involves analyzing potential hazards in the work environment, and they do things to eliminate or minimize such hazards. For example, they may look at things that cause injuries. They may have a bunch of people going out with back injuries, so they may come up with training programs on how to properly lift patients or get better equipment or belts or things of that nature. So that kind of gives you an idea of what the occupational health and safety specialists do. You have your fire equipment salespeople, and a lot of times firefighters may pick up a second job as equipment salespeople or do certain maintenance things on it as a second career, because again, they work 24 on, 48 off. But firefighter certification is not required to work as an equipment salesperson. I know quite a few firemen that also work as fire extinguishing service technicians, and basically they go out to businesses, they look at the extinguishers, and they make sure that they're in date and that they're charged, or if they're not, then they charge them or test them and make sure that everything is up to codes and standards. A lot of times people are also really good with sprinkler systems, and they do both. Now, I'm not so hip on a non-firefighting career label for the fire marshal, but traditionally a fire marshal is a head of the fire prevention division, and these are the folks that do training such as stop, drop, and roll classes for the public to help prevent fires, learn not to burn, don't play with matches, things of that nature. They also go out to businesses and schools, and they do inspections to ensure that there are no fire code violations and sprinkler systems are in date and fire alarms are functioning. And then you also have the arson unit, which also may kind of fall in this group as well. A lot of departments do. And then you have plan review. And what the plan review is, a lot of jurisdictions require that if you're building a new structure in their area, that the fire department has to sign on it. So you'll have somebody within the fire marshal's office that will review the plans and ensure that the plans meet applicable codes and standards for firewalls, sprinkler system, door openings, things of that nature. And a lot of times they also work hand in hand with the local county building inspectors. Okay, here's a slide, a question that you may want to answer because you may see it again on a test. What are two different choices in the fire and emergency service field that an individual may pursue besides civil service employment, meaning working as a firefighter? In this day and age of cell phones with cameras and internet and Wi-Fi, information is crucial, and fire departments a lot of times and a lot of counties and other agencies have what is known as a PIO, or a public information officer. And this person's job is to communicate with the public about fire department activities and actions. They need to be very good with verbal skills and knowledge of the media. Basically, they are the liaison between the incident commanders and the media. They're going to take the information that the incident commanders on scene, the fire chiefs or sheriff's department, and they're going to relay what the public needs to do and what they need to know. So in order to be a PIO, you need to have good written and verbal communication skills. And these skills are all outlined in NFPA 1035, Standard for Professional Qualifications for Public Fire and Life Safety Educator. Notice already we've seen a lot of NFPA standards, and it would, again, behoove you to know what standard has to do with what thing. So, for example, NFPA 1001 is a standard that deals with training for initial firefighters. NFPA 1035 is the standard that deals with public fire and life safety educators. Again, looking in the fire marshal side and the prevention side with your fire prevention specialists, the fire safety educators, such things as the stop, drop, and roll classes, Smokey the Bear, which actually for the forestry was one of the most popular fire prevention programs ever invented. The other one being Sparky the Fire Dog, that you see is the big Dalmatian that's designed to help get the educational messages out to the smaller children. When we look at training for our firefighters, a lot of times you'll have fire department training specialists, such as your training officers, and they're tasked with developing and coordinating programs for fire department education. Not only the initial education for people coming in the door, but continuing education. Firefighters on a yearly basis in Georgia have to have 24 hours of fire training as certified by the fire chief. And then, of course, you have other agencies like ISO or the insurance underwriters organization that like to have you do more hours. And we'll go more into ISO rating later, but basically they're a company that says how good your fire department is. And that's good to know for now. They also are tasked with keeping up with records and things of that nature and certifications and helping folks advance in their career. An insurance adjuster. Again, these are folks that come out and they will negotiate the loss with the claim holders after a fire or a disaster. So they go in after a fire and they look at the damage and they come up with a magic number to help families with insurance rebuild their life. We talked a little bit about building inspections, but your fire inspectors have their own credential, just like your arson investigators. And these folks go in and they examine the interior and exterior of the buildings for fire hazards and code compliance. Sometimes they collect fees for licensing and permit, and main objective is to be proactive in preventing fire from occurring. So again, these are the folks that go out and say, hey, you know what, you probably don't want to do that because if a fire happened, XYZ could happen. We talked about the fire investigator a bit already, the arson folks. But again, they can also be investigators that are not on the fire department payroll, but on the insurance department payroll. And they are, of course, privately employed, but they do basically the same job. They work with law enforcement and firefighters. A lot of times they have more resources to test things to try to determine the cause of the fire. Because again, the insurance company, they don't want to pay out a claim if it was intentionally set by the homeowner or someone else or prevent it from happening. Statisticians are responsible for maintaining records according to the NFIRS, and that's the National Fire Incident Reporting System. There are private, volunteer, or paid opportunities, but these are the folks that come up with the numbers in terms of how many structure fires we have, how many hazmat incidences, and more specific stuff, so they can look at trends within the community and see if the community needs are being met. Fire protection careers, such as the fire protection engineers, and these are the folks that design structures to optimize fire resistance. They may work for large fire departments, engineering firms, or other private companies, but again, they go in, they look at the plans, and they come up with ideas to prevent fire from spreading or not starting at all. sprinklers, firewalls, etc. Sometimes firefighters are contracted and they go overseas and they're employed by companies that work for the Department of Defense. A lot of times they're airports or industrial type crews. And for example, you look over in the Middle East, a lot of your military bases out there are protected, firefighter speaking, by private citizens that are hired by companies to go in and do the job. Okay, interesting question, guys, to think about. Why do you think there is an increased need for overseas firefighters? And when you think about it, think not only about military areas, but think about all the industries out there, all the oil facilities and things of that nature, such as Saudi Arabia. Of course, we can't forget about the inventors or people that come up with new and exciting toys for us to play with in the fire service. Examples being GPS, global positioning system, GIS, the mapping systems, or other things such as ultra high pressure firefighting nozzles or thermal imaging cameras. So there's always some new technology on the horizon. And of course, we can't leave out our volunteers. Now, some volunteer opportunities are your CERT teams, and these folks may work with the fire department or the emergency management agencies. And again, it stands for Community Emergency Response Team, but they're kind of tasked with helping out during disasters such as, say, flooding or snowstorms, things of that nature, help supporting the fire, EMS, and the public safety folks. A lot of times they do help with searches. Maybe they help set up shelters. They run rehab, all kind of fun stuff. You have your Fire Corps, which is a FEMA program which brings community members into local fire emergency services departments to assist with non-emergency tasks. So that would be, for example, you have your firefighters out on the fire line, and these folks maybe fill air cylinders or things of that nature. They do tasks to support the firefighters in the field. A big sector out there now post 9/11 is jobs in emergency management or emergency cares under the Department of Homeland Security. A lot of preparedness and preventive measures go into this, but these are the folks that deal with disaster mitigation. They plan for a disaster, and then they come up with how you're going to respond to it as a community or an entity. Okay, so let's summarize what we've talked about. Now, granted, we really went over quickly a lot of the different jobs, but again, that's what this was designed to do, to give you an idea of all the different career possibilities within the fire service other than just firefighter. So jobs in the fire service will continue to be a stable place of employment, and I think a lot of times during hard economic times, this is why a lot of tradesmen go into the fire service, because say maybe the building market is in slump. Firefighters have taken on more roles, and the job has become a profession. And we wear many different hats in the fire service, whether it be EMS, hazmat, airport firefighter, search and rescue, you name it. The challenges are real, and so are the rewards. So, again, even though this is not a live lecture, you can look at your calendar and see when Blackboard Collaborate Ultra will be open for you guys to jump in and do some live Q&A. Or you can email me at aroberts@athenstech.edu. Or you can give me a call at 706-357-0162. So make sure now that you look at Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, you read them all, and then you go ahead and make sure you knock out all the review questions for this week's assignment. Again, any questions, give me a holler. Otherwise, have a good week.